So as you know, we are close to reaching 30,000 subscribers, which is mind-blowing to me, and honestly, this wouldn't be possible without you guys. So to thank each and every one of you, I'm giving away 300, that's right, 300 pro-grade micro SD cards for your Nintendo Switch, so all of you can double the storage and re-download any titles you deleted because of Tears of the Kingdom. All you have to do is click on the link below, which will apply a $40 discount to any Vodafone SD card, add a 64GB or 32GB to the cart, and proceed to the checkout. That's it. The code will apply to any size, so you can even use it for a higher storage for a pretty hefty discount. We will also select 10 people who get the 128, 256, or 512GB card, or any other product from the site to get a free Nintendo Switch online subscription and a secret surprise. They have fantastic accessories like this Tears of the Kingdom case kit for people that couldn't get the special edition, and even 8-bit do to connect a PlayStation or Xbox controller to the Switch. They also sell multiple do-it-yourself repair kits like this one to replace any Joy-Con and stop the drift. So you find anything you like, use my discount code RESTART to get a 50% off on any order. Also, if we get 1,500 likes on this video, Vodafone will add another 200 coupons to the giveaway. Please keep in mind that we want the most people to get an SD card, so shipping is not included and all packages will be sent individually. Once again, thank you all for the support, and let's get straight into the video.
Hey, listen!
Welcome everyone, this is Andres Restart, and this time we are talking about the origins of the Zonai in Tears of the Kingdom. We're going to be having a bit of a discussion and hopefully eventually a solid theory on just where the Zonai came from. In order to do that though, there will have to be some talk on spoilers, so we will be going over some story elements in Tears of the Kingdom. We won't have to talk about the end of the game, but we will be talking about some of the memories we experienced throughout the Tears of the Dragon quest, so you have been warned. So as a starting point, I want to go over the scene between Ganondorf and King Rauru, where Ganondorf is apparently swearing his fealty to the king. And there's a couple lines here that I think have a lot of significance. So the first line we'll be focusing on here that Ganondorf says is, "When your Zonai ancestors first descended upon these lands long, long ago, they must have seemed to be gods." So there are several takeaways I have from this. When he says first descended upon, that implies that there may have been more than one time they descended upon, but even more significant is the fact that they descended. They came down. From where? The skies high, high above? The big main quest centered around the Wind Temple does have some story implications suggesting that the Zonai people may come from high, high above. But how high? We know there are all these sky islands, and that is pretty high up there. Are these simply another race that would have existed along with the people of Skyloft, for example, in Skyward Sword? Or could they perhaps be from an even higher point, or something that's otherworldly, be it from the gods or aliens in some way? I think those are all possibilities. While calling them aliens, in the traditional sense, may seem like a bit of a stretch, I do think it should be pointed out that they have explored around with the idea of aliens and UFOs before in Zelda games, including Breath of the Wild, and even the Sheikah themselves seem to demonstrate some otherworldly-like qualities and abilities. So it might not be as much of a stretch as you think. But I do think there is something to the idea of them coming from high above and having a closer connection to the gods than your typical other race of Hyrule. Going back to his line though, Ganondorf also says long, long ago. There's a need to say long ago more than once, implying that there is a great deal of history before this point in time. Which is interesting because these memories take place during the founding of Hyrule, which is a long time before any of the events of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. How long? Well, that's a whole other debate for another day that we've actually already had before, so I'll link that somewhere or someplace. But continuing on here, he also remarks on how they must have seemed to be gods, which further connects this idea that maybe the Zonai have some closer connection to the gods than others. And this is interesting because we know that the Zonai, specifically King Rauru, has a third eye when using his powers. And the idea of having a third eye from different religions and stories of the world is that it's supposed to represent a greater level of enlightenment and connection from a spiritual perspective, which I would argue further supports the idea that the Zonai with their third eyes, because even Mineru has one, it just never opens up, is that they do have a closer connection to the gods. But it's this next line that we're going to go over that might take the direction of this conversation in a place you may not have expected. It is unfortunate that the noble Zonai no longer grace this world with their presence. So this is interesting. Technically, Ganondorf isn't saying that the Zonai have been killed off, although that could be an interpretation. He's simply saying they no longer grace this world. So if the Zonai were already a seemingly otherworldly-like race, maybe they went back to where they came from, or maybe they went somewhere else. Which brings me back to a theory many have had, myself included, before Tears of the Kingdom came out. And that's a potential connection to the Twilight from the Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Now this may seem crazy, but just hear me out here for a moment. Before we saw King Rauru or Mineru from Tears of the Kingdom, there's a lot of discussion that the ancient ruins we saw all throughout Breath of the Wild, and also these green-like energies and markings we see all throughout, could somehow be representing the Twilight in a new era. Because when you take a look at the Twilight and Twilight Princess, they also have a lot of very strange-like structures that are similar, and a lot of their markings are also similar, many of which are depicted with a green-like glow. And when we take a look at the different forms of the Twilight, some of them very clearly are taking on more bestial or animal-like qualities, similar to the Zonai. Now, what I'm saying here isn't so much that the Zonai are the Twilight. I am not saying that. But I do think they could be related. Perhaps they have a common ancestor. Because it is told to us in Twilight Princess that there were usurpers that were trying to take control of the sacred realm long before the events of Twilight Princess, which likely is long before the events of Ocarina of Time, because there's supposedly only a 100-year gap there. And if you buy into the theory that the founding of Hyrule in Tears of the Kingdom is still the same original founding of Hyrule, and that the Kotaka and Koemi we see in Tears of the Kingdom are the same ones in Ocarina of Time, then the memories only take place a few hundred years before Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess, suggesting that this battle that took place, where there were these interlopers, a magic-wielding tribe, that try to take dominion over the Sacred Realm, happened way before any events you see in Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, including the memories. But that is just a possibility in terms of timeline stuff. The main point here is that there was a people, a magic-wielding tribe that tried to take over the Sacred Realm, but were banished. They are no longer in this world, no longer gracing their presence. As Ganondorf is saying here, that the noble Zonai no longer grace this world with their presence. And what's extra interesting about this is that he refers to them as the noble Zonai. Ganondorf may have some respect for the noble Zonai, because if he saw what they tried to do during the war of trying to establish dominion over the Sacred Realm, maybe he respected that effort. But that is just a possibility. Now we'll come back to the significance of this potential Twilight connection in a moment, so just stick with me here, but I want to go further down this road of what may be connecting the Twilight to the Zonai. So, yesterday, I put out a quick little short just talking about how it looks like the 3 dragons in Breath of the Wild that also are in Tears of the Kingdom, the Servants of the Spring, that have names representative of the goddesses that created the land, suggesting that they are in some way closely tied to this mission to protect and watch over the land. I believe these 3 dragons were at one point Zonai. So in another memory, Mineru, one of the 2 Zonai we see in Tears of the Kingdom, talks about how once upon a time, there were those who went through this process of draconification, which is the act of ingesting a secret stone. And when you do so, you become an eternal dragon and lose yourself. So before the events of Tears of the Kingdom, we only knew of 3 eternal dragons, Farosh, Dinrol, and Naydra. And when you take a look at their designs, the faces have goat or dog-like qualities. And actually in creating a champion, it said that's exactly what they were attempting to do. And when you take a look at the Zonai themselves, they also have animal-like qualities, like a dog or a goat. But even more interesting is that when you pay close attention to the manes of these 3 dragons, they match up quite similarly to King Rauru. Now, it seems some people argue that the other dragons look the same, so this probably isn't the case. Well, that's just, I don't think, true. The light dragon, the 4th dragon we see, if you pay attention to her, she is Princess Zelda. We learned that throughout the story of the Tears of the Dragon quest. The mane of the light dragon is very different from the manes of the other dragons. It actually is basically what Zelda's hair is. And the overall features are very different from the other dragons. It's a lot more narrow, sleeker, smaller. It doesn't have the same animal-like qualities as the other 3, which are more closely tied to the Zonai, I believe. So I believe that the 3 eternal dragons, the servants of the springs, at one point were Zonai. And to further support this, we do have the 3 different armor sets that are based off the dragons, but are also Zonai armor sets. And part of what's important about this distinction of the origins of these dragons is that one, it shows a history where there were other Zonai that for some reason or another chose to go through draconification. But I also think it suggests that the Zonai have an even closer relationship to the gods, because they were named Dinral, Naydra, and Farosh, and they oversee and guide the lands to protect the lands of Hyrule, so they went through draconification. But there's something else I noticed that at first I wasn't going to cover, but as I explored it a little bit more, I thought it was worth bringing in. So keep in mind, the 3 dragons are potentially originally Zonai. What if these 3 dragons are also the spirits of the spring in Twilight Princess? Now, I know the spirits of the spring aren't necessarily dragons, they are different animals, they are depicted in an entirely different way, but I think it should be noted that across different Zelda games, things are told in a slightly different way. There's a different art style, there's a different perspective. There are going to be changes on how different concepts are depicted game by game. The Rito we see today are very different from the Rito we saw in the Wind Waker. But stick with me here, even though this may seem like a bit of a stretch. 3 of the spirits of the springs have the increased importance of directing you towards the fused shadow. And the Nehru is the one that tells Link about the Interloper War, the history of these people. So if these spirits are Zonai, they would potentially know about this. Now again, them talking kind of takes away from the idea of them also being the eternal dragon simply depicted in a certain way, but the amount they talk is very minimal, and again, it could just come down to how things are depicted game by game. But they do serve the springs, and the 3 main spirits are Faron, Eldin, and Lanayru. And when you go to them to rescue them from the Twilight, you have to collect their Tears of Light. Tears. If these spirits are in some way tied to the eternal dragons, they could also have tears like the light dragon did all throughout Tears of the Kingdom. But that's where things get even more interesting, talking about the 4th dragon. I always found it weird in Twilight Princess how there was a 4th spirit, or Dona. But with the inclusion of the light dragon, Princess Zelda, that according to the memories has existed throughout a lot of the history of Hyrule, there's your 4th spirit. But what you'll notice about the tale of the Interloper War and the spirits sealing away this magic-wielding tribe that I think are the Zonai, only 3 of the light spirits were used, not the 4th one. If the 4th one came in later, afterwards, like the light dragon has, it would make sense. So I think there's a decent chance that the light spirits in Twilight Princess are another way of depicting the eternal dragons, these servants of the springs, they're all serving springs, in Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild. So the reason this is important is because this story from Twilight Princess might further connect the idea that the Zonai and the Twilight were once connected, but also the Zonai that became eternal dragons, or light spirits, had a mission from the gods to protect the lands. And maybe it's as simple as, because they were closer to the gods and they had this heightened sense of spirituality as hinted by the third eye, the gods expected them to take on more of a role to protect the lands of Hyrule throughout history. But if it is true that the Zonai share a link with the Twilight and it's all tying it with this interloper war, I think there can be more extrapolated here. We know the Zonai have been around for a long time. And when we take a look at the constructs, they share a resemblance to the ancient robots from Skyward Sword, who we know were a part of an ancient advanced civilization from long before any events in Skyward Sword. So yes, they've been around for a very long time, but this link to Skyward Sword could be important because there was a war that took place before the events of Skyward Sword involving the goddess and the Demon King at the time, Demise, where they were attempting to acquire the Triforce, which is housed in the Sacred Realm. Is it possible that this war took place between the goddess and Demise is also the Usurper War? Is it possible that this magic-wielding tribe took part in this war in an effort to also establish dominion over the Sacred Realm, and because of this, the gods had to punish them, so for those that didn't attempt to steal the Sacred Realm, they had to pay the price of what their people have done, and some of them were elected to become eternal dragons or maybe light spirits and send their people to another realm, the Twilight Realm. And in order to do this, they needed to go through deconification, which can only be done by being given a secret stone. And because the gods wouldn't be around, and the Zonai would still be around for some time, maybe they were given more secret stones so they would have the ability to guide and protect the land for ages. And maybe this ties into why we see all these different little triangles on a lot of these Zonai clothing. There is a depiction of this history of this desire for the Sacred Realm or a connection to it or the gods. What I like about this theory is that it somewhat explains why we have the secret stones as opposed to the Triforce pieces in Tears of the Kingdom. But what do you guys think? What do you make of the different ideas presented in this video? Do you agree with any of them? Is there anything else you would like to add? Or do you have a different perspective? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andres Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.